Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. It's the third annual edition of the Three Bars podcast. You usually get 2 bars. You get Scott and I. This week you have a third bar. It's Mr. Rich Hribar. You can follow him on Twitter at Lord Reeves. He does fantastic work over at Sharp Football. You know him from his in-season worksheet. We were just talking about the in-season grind, and Rich, I read your worksheet religiously every week in season. I know we're coming up on the cusp of it, man. It's a good time to talk to you. Good time to talk ball. Biggest draft week of the season is right around the corner. So who better to talk to than Rich? How's it going, man?
What's going on, guys? Yeah, I always love catching up with you guys. I'm sorry I missed you guys in person. Graham, I finally got to meet Graham in person last year for the first time. Didn't see you guys at the expo. And like you said, it's just one of those things. It's the Jesse Spano gift, right? You're so excited. You're so scared that the season is starting. I've started to already put together the week 1 worksheet, and I'm just like, oh boy, it's here.
Oh boy. Yeah, it's a good time of year. Good time of year. Scott is feeling a little under the weather, but he's grinding through it. He's over here in his red room. He's got cigarettes in the ashtray. He's got spoon blasting in the background. But Scott's chilling. How's it going, man?
Yeah. I'm suffering. Had 72 hours of migraines still ongoing, but excited. Excited for Rich Hribar. This is always one of our best shows. Love talking with Reeves, who's like a sort of savant when it comes to I need like a Google Doc up when I'm reading my dang stats, but Hribar, it's all off the top of the dome. It's a thing to behold.
That's why Rich is the man. Scott, I'm just getting a kick out of your fat head in the back. It just makes me laugh every single time. It's just like floating over your shoulder. It's so funny.
There's nothing else on the wall. It's actually incredible. There's just
it's perfect.
John told me to go ahead and buy a giant fat head of that. And I was like, all right, yeah, that's kind of funny. And so I was expecting it to be like life-sized and hang it in the back. And I guess it was in centimeters and not inches or something like that. And now I just have this very tiny me in the background.
It's hilarious. No, it's seriously perfect. It looks like a Woody doll, just like floating above your shoulder. I always get a kick out of it. All right, today we got Rich on. He's the master of top-down projections. I seriously do read pretty much everything Rich writes, and I'm always fascinated to see how Rich views teams. So today we're going to talk about 4, maybe 5 if we have time. We're going to talk about 4 big fantasy teams, and I'll just get it started here. Let's kick it off with the Chargers. Obviously, Kellen Moore, new offensive coordinators in town. Justin Herbert just got the new contract. We've got a new receiver in town, Quentin Johnston. So let's start at the top. What are you expecting to be different from this Chargers offense? How can we expect this offense to be different under Kellen Moore? And what are your thoughts on Justin Herbert and all of these receivers?
Yeah, it's always interesting when you talk about I started doing projections, man. I mean, it's crazy because I just told someone the Konami code actually is about to be 10 years old next month. Wow. It's like that's how long I've been fortunate that I said, but I am aged in this game. And when I started to do projections, I was one of these people that would go back and look at a lot of coordinator stuff, right? And try to incorporate that into my projections. And it took me a couple of years to kind of realize a lot of that's kind of garbage. You see people talk about well, this coordinator has done this for this position. Though doing projections for a decade plus has literally gone back and seen the ball goes to the best players, right? You can have schemes, schemes that players coaches want to run and stuff like that. And you can incorporate that, but the ball goes to the best players, and your personnel grouping almost always gets weeded out to over the course of the season, who your best players are. There used to be all these narratives when we were coming up, Bruce Arians doesn't use his tight end. Kyle Shanahan doesn't use his tight end. You got to have a Kyle Shanahan X receiver. It all just goes back to the personnel those guys had during those periods. When Bruce Arians had Heath Miller, was fine. When Bruce Arians had Rob Gronkowski was good. When Shanahan got George Kittle is a good player. The ball finds him sometimes, not as much as we all would like to, but I always try to, at least for a starting block, try to remind people when you're looking at coordinator stuff, always go back and you have to adjust for personnel. You have to look at personnel. That's literally one of the biggest fallacies you can do. is just to go down like these things and start projecting like position targets out, like based on, what coaches have done in the past. And you see this a little bit with the Chargers, a little bit, because a lot of people talk about how the Cowboys use their tight ends and with Gerald Everett. But when you look at the Chargers from like a top down stance, like how does Gerald Everett get targets, right? Like he's not gonna earn targets over Keenan Allen. He's not gonna earn targets over Austin Eckler. He's not gonna earn targets over Mike Williams. He's probably not gonna earn targets over whoever the wide receiver 3 is. So like you're starting to see some like where we try to retrofit some things that like Kellen Moore has in his past for certain players and try to retrofit that into another player. And anytime you try to do that, that's like a real slippery slope with projections. And I know that was long-winded. I didn't even answer your damn question to start off, but like, I'll at least kick it back to you guys to kind of roll with the conversation here.
No, I think you're right. I didn't mean to like, I'm 100% with you. Like, I think in general, there's like 5 or 6 play callers that like really matter and really make a difference. And then every single year there's like you said, based in large part teams, format their scheme based on the players they have. We are not going to talk about the Cardinals today, but I think they're going to be a lot more 12 personnel with Ertz and McBride, and then obviously Hollywood Brown and Michael Wilson. So yeah, I'm with you. But in general, like I think with the Chargers, it kind of matters, right? Like Joe Lombardi was not very sharp at all last year. This Chargers offense did not throw past the sticks. In fact, on early downs, Herbert had the second lowest average depth of target in the entire NFL, only behind Colt McCoy. So I guess that was kind of my starting point with Moore is like, what can we expect this offense? How can we expect this offense to be different vis-a-vis last year? And then, how can we project out Keenan and Mike Williams from that stance?
Well, I think when you look at it, it's when you look at like the ADOT stuff, and I don't want to give Joe Lombardi any type of hall pass because schematically, what the types of plays he is calling were just, dated anyways. But when you have the injuries to Mike Williams and the injuries to Keenan Allen that the Chargers had, and your top 3 players in terms of routes and targets end up being your running back who led the team in targets, Austin Eckler, then Josh Palmer is second, and then DeAndre Carter is third on the team in routes run, your ADOT's going to suck. It doesn't matter. Like, because when you're talking about like the top down targets where they go, depth of target is a wide receiver stat, right? Like it's not a quarterback stat. So if you're projecting Justin Herbert to make this huge jump in ADOT, right? And a lot of people are, who are the targets going to? Like it has to be Mike Williams or you're betting on Quentin Johnston, because if the top 2 targets on the team are Austin Eckler and Keenan Allen again, your ADOT's not going to make a seismic jump. It just can't, right? Like that's where those players earn targets. And if those are your top 2 target earners on the team, your ADOT's not going to go crazy, right? Like it can go up a little bit, but like it's not going to go wild. Where you see Justin Herbert like being this mad bomber. Like we want him to be Dan Marino, right? Like we do. We want that to happen. And so you have to, if you're betting on a big ADOT jump for Justin Herbert, you have to be betting on Mike Williams or Quentin Johnston to be significant target earners.
That's where I'm at with Mike Williams. I'm a lot higher than most on Williams this year because, like you mentioned, if we're gonna expect a more aggressive passing game, and we've kind of read a little bit about that out of Chargers camp that Williams has been more involved, specifically out of the slot, and I think that matters. Like I'm still expecting Keenan to be 60%, 65% in the slot, but getting Mike in the slot like 30% of the time would actually be huge for his stock and fantasy because over the last 2 years he's only been like 11, 12% in the slot. So yeah, I've been higher on Mike Williams than I think most. I still have Keenan higher in my rankings. And Scott, I know you've been really high on Keenan this offseason.
Yeah, I think what's blowing my mind here is that Justin Herbert led the league in dropbacks last year. His 699 pass attempts ranks 4th most by any quarterback all time. It was almost twice as much as Chicago's 377. And Chargers players and coaches keep talking about how their mind is being blown by how much faster, how much more pass heavy and aggressive this offense is. And so it's like, I was talking to, was it Pace God, Pat Thorman about this, but it's like, they already were at the fastest pace in the league. So imagine them with like taking that up 2 extra notches with Kellen Moore. Like, should the median projection for Justin Herbert be like the most pass attempts by any quarterback in NFL history? What do you think?
I think, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is a team that when you look at them, how they're structurally built, like they're built to throw, because I've thought like forever, like the Chargers were one of these teams that should have signed one of these like dusty guys that were floating around, right? Like maybe Dalvin was too much money, but like the Zekes, the Fournettes, the Kareem Hunts, like one of those guys made so much sense for this team, because when you look at the non Austin Eckler rushing attempts this team had last year, and it was absolutely abysmal. The carries from these other running backs, and Eckler's already a guy that they want to alleviate workloads for anyways. It's like they don't really have anything else behind him, and like these guys aren't they shouldn't run the ball with these guys. Like any of these other guys, they shouldn't hand the ball off to any of these other players. So like they're built to throw the ball around, and then they're going to play in the right kind of conference to have to be forced to throw the ball as well.
Yeah, I appreciated how the Chargers didn't spend waste a third or fourth round pick on a shitty running back this year. They're just like, we're good. We don't need another one of those.
They've tried that a few times.
they're like, we've been burned on these dudes before. I was with you. I thought they should have signed Kareem Hunt or Fournette. I guess they still could. Next week, rosters go down from 90 to 53 on, I think it's Tuesday or Wednesday. There's going to be some running back movement. Maybe the Chargers will be a part of that. Flipping the page here, easily back over to Dallas. Rich, obviously, Kellen Moore's gone. There is a lot of speculation about what this offense is going to look like, pass versus run. I'm with you. I look at personnel first. And if we look at Dallas's personnel, they're going to be a pass-heavy team. I know Mike McCarthy's come out and said, I want to run the damn ball to rush my defense. Whatever. Boomer McCarthy can say whatever the hell he wants. You look at his history. I mean, he was a pass-heavy offense coordinator. This is a West Coast offense. They've got 3 great receivers. Michael Gallup's back healthy. So vibe check on Dallas. What's the rebar projection on Dallas, Dak, Pollard, all these dudes?
Yeah, I'm the same way. I mean, when you look at it from a personnel grouping, and I know everyone's excited about Jake Ferguson, and listen, I'm not going to yuck anyone's yum of taking a shot on Jake Ferguson in these best ball drafts as where he goes, but to expect him to get like Dalton Schultz's target share again, that doesn't, like, that's not transitive property. They add a guy like Brandon Cooks, who's already been a guy that's been a productive player. Brandon Cooks himself, I mean, I think he's one of the better values out there. I think at worst he's a miss small pick where he's going, and at best you're getting an absolute viable wide receiver 2, and then probably the apex outcome if something were to happen to CeeDee Lamb, you get that massive contingency value out of him as well. Because when you look at Dallas, like, they don't have this team that you remove Zeke, you remove Dalton Schultz, like the 2 succubuses from this offense last year in terms of snaps and usage, and you replace them with Brandon Cooks. You get Tony Pollard in there. Like, there's really not a lot behind Tony Pollard. We'll probably see Deuce Vaughn could be like a 4 to 8 touch guy probably, which I think is really fun, right? Like, if something were to happen to Tony Pollard, Deuce Vaughn would never be the contingency bet, but like they probably use more of like a committee. But like getting him on the field for 4 to 8 touches per game looks pretty fun for this team. And I think they're going to throw the ball. What you're worried about with Dallas is just how good the defense is and like the schedule, right? Like, is there going to be a period here where like they're just suffocating teams in the second half of games, and like they're able to kind of slow things down just based on, like, the Eagles did this a lot last year, right? Because you look, Eagles in the first half of games last year were a really aggressive offense. They were top 8, in drop back rate. And then like they just kind of flooded teams and they didn't have to do shit in the second half of games. Like, does that happen to this Dallas team? I think there is potential for that to happen a lot in the schedule because his defense is so good. The pass rush is so good. Their secondary is so good that you run into like these second half game scripts. Maybe they slow things down. But this team, when you look at it, like, this is an 11 personnel team because you get, like you said, Gallup is never like a really good, like, kind of anchor wide receiver 2, but he's like a really solid wide receiver 3 that can get vertical. CeeDee Lamb is one of the most versatile wide receivers. He absolutely smoked in the slot and out wide last year as one of only 3 wide receivers that was in the top 15 in yards per out run and earning targets out of both areas in the middle of the field and out wide. And they just don't have Noah Brown as their wide receiver 2 anymore, right? Like, it's really, when you look at this team from a top-down stance, like, they're made to play 11 personnel this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been taking shots on Jake Ferguson. He's like one of my favorite last-round tight ends in best ball too. Obviously, a lot to get excited about hype-wise, but I'm with you. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, we're looking at CeeDee Lamb, minimum 25% target share. Then, like you mentioned, I think it'll be Cooks 20 to 22. Then, like Gallup's always in that 18 to 20 range. And then what's left for Ferguson? I'll flip it right back to you, Rich. Where do you have Pollard in your rankings? Because he's a guy, I've been drafting him a ton in the second round. I think he projects like a first round pick. But where do you have him kind of in a loaded, honestly, now top 6, top 7?
Yeah, I have him 8th overall, RB3.
Okay.
I actually think that there's a case to be made that he's a better pick than Austin Eckler. We didn't really talk about Eckler a little bit with the Chargers, but like Eckler had like really weird kind of splits last year based on like who was on the field, with the Chargers, and when they had Mike Williams and Keenan Allen available, his actual like route participation was way down. So I'm really curious to see if like that's something that's sticky with Kellen Moore or not. It's hard to take that as transitive property because all the changes they have, and the Chargers still have nobody back there. But I think Pollard's like in contention because he's one of those types of players. I'm curious Scott's take. Like, is this what like the new like running back in fantasy looks like? Like these guys, like when you look at McCaffrey, Eckler, Pollard, because like we're losing these like true traditional like bell cow guys, these 3-down running backs. Like it's continually getting siphoned in the NFL. We only had 4 running backs last year, averaged 20 touches per game. It was like the fewest in like a decade. Like is it these guys, like these 210-pound guys that like can just catch and play all 3 downs, but like don't get 350 touches? Like I'm real curious to see like what you think, because you obviously are like the bell cow dude.
Right. Yeah, I think it goes back to the work I've done in weighted opportunity, where targets and PPR leagues are worth 2.5 times as much as a carry for running back. So like you don't need those. And like outside of the red zone, that's, I don't know, 3.25 times as much. So it's like, yeah, why don't you just, spare this guy the wear and tear? Don't give him he can take 40 to 50% of the in between the 20s carries, and then just give him all of the rest, high value touches. And that's what's going to really move the needle. And especially for a guy like Christian McCaffrey, who would have been drafted in round 1 if he was like, I refuse to play running back, I'm a slot wide receiver. And Eckler, who is breaking receiving records as well. So yeah, that definitely could be the case. I think you're right. I think those are, easily the top 2 running backs. And then Pollard, I don't know that I have him RB3, but I definitely see the case for that.
It's a unique thing. And, it's funny, as I wrote about the running quarterbacks, a decade ago, as we talked about, and it's funny to see how the running quarterbacks are manipulating fantasy football in different ways now, because they are reducing running back touches, especially if you look at like share of running back touches inside the 5-yard line. And then they're also reducing throws to running backs, because targets per game for running backs have dropped 5 consecutive years now in the NFL. And it's like literally everything lines up with like the increase of the mobile quarterback. And it's just really crazy how it's impacting now the running back position and not just the top of the quarterback position.
Yeah, I mean, these elite quarterbacks like Hurts, Allen, we'll put Lamar in that category this year. I certainly do. Like these guys are pinball machines. Like literally, like any type of scoring, they're going to get it. Like they're just going to bounce off the walls and score. Like I think that's kind of we didn't get a chance to talk about this in our last projection show, but like real quick, Rich, what's your read on the elite quarterbacks going in the late 2nd, early 3rd round? Like, is that market efficiency? Is that chasing upside? Is that an overreaction? Like, what's your read say?
Yeah, it is. I mean, when you look at our history of drafting fantasy football, and it's gotten better, right? Like I do an ADP series for the site, and we've consistently gotten better at drafting players because we kind of honed in on like what archetypes to draft, right? Like that's one thing you see more in fantasy football more than ever. It used to be you get a lot of player analysis, and we do still do a lot of player analysis, and people talk about that. But like a lot of people know what to identify. Like when you talk about like Scott doing like the bell cow work, like when you draft a running back, you want him to check these boxes. When you draft a quarterback, you want him to check these boxes. And a lot of people have gotten great at identifying that quarterback archetype. that used to be, when I talk about the original Konami code, it was like the guys like Terrell Pryor, like Justin Fields last year is like a traditional Konami code guy. But like when you have the guys like Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts or like 2019 Lamar Jackson, like when you get the passing upside season with the rushing season, like people have identified like you can't really combat those guys, right? Like 2015 Cam Newton, like those guys are just jailbreak kind of cheat codes, right? Like, and so like people know like, hey, we have to. That's why Fields is getting still drafted where he is right now, right? Because we're baking in like, well, what if he does have a great passing season? Like, what are we going to do? We have to take him there. And when you look at like sub tier of like Burrow, Herbert, and Trevor Lawrence, like those guys give you a little bit of rushing, but those guys to even compete with being the QB1, which I think is pretty thin that any of those guys can actually be the QB1 overall. Like they have to throw 40 passing touchdowns. There's like really no other outcome. Like they have to throw 40 passing touchdowns, and just banking on that is really fragile to begin with. Like look what happened to Herbert last year. It's not Herbert's fault, but like that's the slope you fall on if some things fall apart. You run into just either a cattywampus touchdown rate or like some skill players get hurt around you. And you're that archetype that doesn't have that like full rushing to fall on, like the bottom falls out. Like if you spent a high draft pick on Justin Herbert last year, like you probably weren't very good. Your team probably wasn't very good at all. And that's the fragility you have even with guys like that in that sub tier. That's why I think you have to treat Lamar and Fields, even if they maybe aren't as safe as those guys, you have to treat them as just better at ADP because of that, the apex range of outcome versus those guys. They're just drawing more live with a higher percent odds to be the QB1 overall than those three guys.
Yeah, I mean, I've got Lamar at QB4, but it's not too far behind the top three. Like it's like he's right there in terms of ceiling, I think, with the top three. Then, like you mentioned, the safety with Lamar. By the way, you mentioned like a good passing season for Justin Fields. His first 2 years, he's averaged like 150 yards per start. A good passing season would be like 180 yards. Like that would honestly kind of take him to that next level, like 180, 190 yards per game. I don't think it's totally out of the realm of possibilities, but yeah, did want to bring that up with you. We'll get back to projections talk. Got to talk Jets. Got to talk Hard Knocks team.
Obviously, do you guys watch Hard Knocks? Is Hard Knocks like a thing for you guys?
I watched the last two last night. Actually, it's okay. Yeah, I think it's been boring.
There's no way Scott watches Hard Knocks, right?
Yeah, it's been boring for a number of years. No, Scott does not. There's no way.
I haven't watched it in a long time.
Actually, I made my girlfriend buy HBO Go so I could watch it. I watched the first 2 episodes as well.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Wait, it's Max now, not HBO Go. You got to get it right.
That's whatever it is. I'm getting Ant-Man. Like I don't know that I'm super excited to draft Aaron Rodgers, but like I don't know. Probably the MVP odds are nice. Probably Jets to win the Super Bowl is nice, or am I just one of these people from New York City who is getting a little too excited, or maybe it's this show brainwashing and propagandizing me. What do you think, Hribar?
I think if you want to bet the Jets, you do it in season because obviously they're the hype team. They're everywhere in front of us, right? Like they're on HBO, they're on Hard Knocks. But their pre-buy schedule is a nightmare. It's like they open versus the Bills, the Cowboys, the Patriots, the Chiefs, the Broncos, and the Eagles, and then they have a bye. And then things get a lot better. So like, let's say this team is like 2-4 or 3-3. Everyone's gonna be like, oh, it's the everyone told us to get hype about these guys. It's the next dream team. None of these teams work out. But then you look at like them coming out of the bye. Things get a lot better. So I think they're like that Buccaneers team with Brady. There's a lot of similarities between like this Rodgers transition and like Brady's transition a couple years ago. Remember the Bucs? I think the Bucs at that season were like 7-5 halfway through the year, and then they just won their last 8 straight games. I think we could see something similar to that because like this defense is that good. It allows you the front of the season for them to kind of figure things out on offense, what they want to do, get this offensive line kind of settled versus that really rough schedule. And then you come back and you look at that second half schedule and you're like, yeah, there's a lot of winnable games there. So I think if you want to bet the Jets to win the Super Bowl, you're going to get a lot better odds like in week 4, 5, and 6 than you probably are getting right now.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, the front half of their schedule is just brutal. I mean, and the 2 games that they're favored, they get a home game against the Patriots. The other game they're favored is on the road against the Broncos. And I mean, the Broncos still have a pretty good defense. Next week they play the Eagles and they have their bye. I mean, it's a really rough stretch. I
That
guess
Broncos game is going to be fun
yeah.
because that's the Sean Payton
I
yeah,
know.
that's
I
going to be
know.
hot. That one's going to be
I
hot.
hope Garrett Wilson comes back out in his bucket hat and his shades. I hope there's a lot of shade. But Rich, got to talk this backfield. I mean, obviously game script, we were just talking about it. I mean, game script won't be great out of the gates. Breece Hall versus Dalvin Cook. Obviously, been a lot of debate on fantasy Twitter. Breece Hall is, back in practice. He's looking good. All the Jets beats say he's cutting and looking great. Aaron Rodgers is even hype him up. How do you view this backfield?
Yeah, this is interesting because this is like a lot of things like projections can't capture, right? Like, when will Breece Hall be at 100% workload? Will he ever be at 100% workload? Then you factor in like the Rodgers stuff, right? Like it's one thing to factor in the Breece Hall injury stuff and trying to get a gauge on that. And you guys have a great, person at your guys' website in Edwin that can kind of diagnose and lead us on the right path of like, hey, Breece Hall checks all these boxes. But then you add Dalvin Cook and GM Rodgers, right? Like, what if Rodgers just wants Dalvin Cook in the game? Like, that's like a
Very
range
real
of outcomes. Like that could just exist, right? Like, like that could be a thing. I've been taking shots on Breece Hall, like when he gets like past like that, like firewall of like no man's land and wide receiver, especially if I started wide receiver heavy. But there's definitely some risk here because like we talked about that front half schedule, which could be really good for Breece Hall because even if he starts off slow, he gets that like really kind of reduced workload through like the toughest part of the season. And if he comes out of the bye in week 8, and he's getting that back for that like big workload that he had before he got injured, like then you're cooking with something because the schedule ends up. But also in fantasy, you've played 7 weeks, half your regular season. Like what if your team isn't like in a position? So he's kind of a tricky kind of fantasy gamble. I had already had the like non-Jets, non-Breece Hall running backs for the Jets projected for like 210 carries anyways before the Dalvin Cook signing. So like Dalvin Cook taking up like a huge chunk of that, like didn't really injure like my Breece Hall projection. But like I said, there's just so many things projections can't capture in this scenario that are really wild cards. So I think Breece Hall for me is one of these guys that like fits like a specific team structure. How strong am I? Is it like a 0 RB team? Is this a situation where I already have an anchor running back and like I don't need to chase like Breece Hall being that alpha, like him just coming back because I already have a Tony Pollard, one of these guys we viewed early. And then I can have it be more of a luxury because I think the 0 RB teams are being more trouble with Breece Hall, right? Like counting on him to deliver because you're probably not going to get that front of the season delivery out of him. So you could be buried by week 8 by the time he comes back and you just can't get out of that hole. But if you have a Tony Pollard or Christian McCaffrey and Austin Eckler and you grab a Breece Hall in round 5 or 6 if he slides, now you've got that anchor running back, right? And now you've got a chance to maybe have 2 of those bell cow backs for the back half of the season. And you probably have already tread enough water because you have one of those guys of the front half of the season as well. So I think if it's those builds more than the guy like just typically grabbing him, like kind of where I did in that super flex league we're in all together, I'm probably a lot more risk, taking him there than those teams. And then auction formats, right? Just because you mitigate opportunity cost more in auction formats, you can get Breece Hall and still not have to forego a lot of players that go around him typically in ADP. So that's kind of how I like see it. I think it's going to be a really rough opening 6 weeks and he's got a week 7 bye. So like if you're counting on production out of him for a roster spot, like that's you could be dead halfway through the season.
Yeah. I mean, I could see it the other way with Breece. Like, there's still a ton of running backs that I love in the mid rounds, and I know Scott would agree. There's 3 or 4 that I've been drafting. So you could get Breece in rounds 4 and 5, and then just take a shotgun in rounds 5, 6, and 7. And it's like, okay, maybe I won't use Breece in the first couple of weeks, but like, I feel great with Rashad White and David Montgomery or Rashad White and James Conner or something like that. I can find ways to stopgap that production. Breece is someone I wasn't drafting at all in the 3rd round. I just thought the risk profile was way too much against the cost of the opportunity cost of the receivers in that pocket, like DK Metcalf, Calvin Ridley, Deebo Samuel. But now, I mean, he's going in a pocket behind Mike Williams and like Christian Kirk, and it's like, all right, I can definitely buy into Breece in that pocket compared to the previous wide receiver pocket. Scott, what's your take on Breece? I don't think you and I have talked about Breece since the news happened with Dalvin. Have you changed your rankings at all? Have you changed your opinion at all?
Yeah, I was kind of really down on him, and then
Okay.
this happened, and I pushed him down even more. I just think Dalvin is definitely the least cooked of these free agent running backs, and the contract kind of hinted in that direction. He's been dealing with his shoulder injury for a really long time, but he said in interviews that it like really bothered him last year. It sapped him of his typical physicality, and it showed up on the field. And yeah, I just think he has more juice than like a Zeke Elliott or Fournette by a significant margin. And then it's just the Jets kept saying that they don't want a bell cow running back. The OC was never a bell cow guy. The head coach was never a bell cow guy. I mean, like Brees saw really good volume last season, but I don't think he cleared like a 65% snap share in any single game. Michael Carter was still getting significant work. And then when he got hurt, it was a committee between the other two backs. And then there were the reports that they were trying to draft Jahmyr Gibbs at pick 15 overall. So like every indication to me, just like, I don't think that there's, league winning upside here. It seems like they clearly want a committee backfield.
And they're gonna be slow. Like this team's, they have a great defense, and Rodgers is a selfish lover, man. Like he's gonna play slow. Like this team's gonna be it's gonna be a slog.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to ask you is like, is that a LaFleur thing, or you think that's just a Rodgers thing? That's a Rodgers
I think
thing.
it's more of a Rodgers thing. I think it's a
Yeah.
Rodgers comfort thing, right? Like unless you got 12 men on the field, like he's bleeding that thing out.
Yeah, true.
It's the only time that he snaps the ball early. If he counts, he's got that 12th man.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, fair enough. Real quick before we move on, final team. Corey Davis retired unexpectedly yesterday. Does that do anything for your Garrett Wilson projection, Allen Lazard, Tyler Conklin? How'd you kind of redistribute targets there?
Yeah, I didn't have Corey Davis projected for a lot. He was a guy I was like taking 18th round swings on just because, I thought he was, still like a decent enough player and was going to play with a good quarterback. Hey, like what if he luck boxed into 6 to 8 touchdowns, right? But that's not happening now. There's definitely a place in the multiverse where Corey Davis smashed, didn't have all those early career injuries, kind of played in more aggressive offenses, but unfortunately not for us.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, because he was like the consensus 101 that year. It was like him and Fournette. And that was the McCaffrey draft too, which is funny. Like in hindsight, looking back on it, it's like a lot of people got McCaffrey at 3, and that worked out pretty well.
Scott and I had McCaffrey at 1 that year, and we had Fournette at 2, and then Davis at 3. So it was a good year for Scott and I with McCaffrey at 1. But
Scott was on the. It's a really bummer that Derry Sanders never caught on.
It did. I mean, that's
nickname.
one of the greatest nicknames of all time.
I forget the name of the company, but the big fantasy football apparel company, they did make a Derry Sanders shirt. So
was it RotoWear?
Still exists. Yeah, RotoWear. There you go.
It was a great nickname. That's a bummer that one never caught on, because that was great.
Yeah. Derry Sanders, man. We can call him in our hearts.
Let me ask you guys how you're handling it. Like, obviously Garrett Wilson has climbed all summer. And like, is there like a path? Obviously he's gonna get more efficient targets, but is there like a path for him to really compete from a target count of some of the guys he goes around in ADP? And I also want to ping pong that off you guys, because I don't know if we'll get there, about the Chris Olave ADP even more. Like, what if these guys end up being like 125 target players? Like, where they're going. Like a lot of people want to take Garrett Wilson over Amon-Ra St. Brown, right? Like Amon-Ra St. Brown could have 45 more targets than this dude.
I'm not taking Garrett Wilson over Amon-Ra. I'm not taking Garrett Wilson over Devontae Adams. I mean, Adams is still like the premier target earner. I think that's a little closer between him and Amon-Ra, but I'm with you. Wilson has been my wide receiver 10 pretty much all offseason behind Adams. And when it comes to Olave, I've been lower on Olave too, man. Like I've gotten below Ridley in my rankings, and similar concern. It's like, I don't think the Saints are going to be all that pass heavy. They're not going to be super fast. And Michael Thomas is back healthy. And I know it's Michael Thomas, blah, blah, blah. But like that kind of does matter. And they actually have some decent secondary targets now with Rashid Shaheed and Juwan Johnson. Alvin Kamara will be back. So yeah, as much as I love Olave as a player, I'm with you. Projecting out his targets it's difficult, especially compared to the players he goes in the same range. Like I'm definitely taking Jalen Waddle ahead of him.
How about you, Scott? Let me get this. I want to know. I know what you're doing with these guys.
Yeah, I've got Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver 6, Garrett Wilson, wide receiver 8, Chris Olave, wide receiver 15. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I like it. Olave is one of these guys. The more I've gotten to like this point, like I have a harder time seeing him get that, like, compete with those guys from like a target stance. It's like he's a great player, right? And like I think Drake London's a really good player, but like where are we getting the target counts from these guys? We don't know like if like Derek Carr is gonna be like that much of an upgrade. The Saints have like a really soft schedule. We were kind of talking about the NFC South before the show. And you look at like the back half of last year, like the Saints they were like the slowest team in the NFL. They ran the fewest amount of plays in the NFL, weeks 8 to 18. They were 27th in dropback rate over that span. And like over that span, Chris Olave had just 2 top 20 scoring weeks. He had one game where he ran 30 pass routes over that entire span.
Yeah.
And like, is that something that happens again? Like, this is a really good player. I'm not trying to pull away from that, but like, we have to make hard decisions at the front of drafts, right? Like, we're selecting good players versus good players. We know that these guys are inherently good players. So like, does he really have that target count, like that target outcome? Because I want my guy to have that like insulation of like, what if he's not the most efficient player, right? Because we know efficiency is more cattywampus than volume. So I want the guy that's going to maybe get 170 targets, right? Like I want that guy on my roster.
Yeah. I just don't think that's in Olave's range of outcomes unless Michael Thomas gets hurt again and Rashid Shaheed gets hurt again. Because right now, I mean, I've got Olave for 130, and I don't think there's a range where he gets to 150 unless the Saints like absolutely stink this year, which we were talking about before the show. Like the NFC South is wide open. I think you can easily say the Saints are the favorite.
Even if you hate Derek Carr, he like objectively is probably right now for this season in a vacuum the best quarterback in that division.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely he is. And I don't think that's even a question. I mean, I saved Saints for last. I'm glad we did bring it up because Olave has been a guy that I've been a little lower on. And Rich, did you say where you have Olave in your rankings?
Yeah, I have him at 13, but I was like, he's in that area where like I've never really comfortable taking him there either.
Yeah, right. I've got him at 17. I've got him behind Waddle, Higgins, and Ridley. Yeah. Actually 16. Sorry. All right, final team. Rich, this has been great so far, but we got to get out of here before we get out of here. We got to talk Kansas City Chiefs. We got to talk their wide receivers. Just how you're projecting out this wide receiver group. Will there be a guy this year we can actually rely on in fantasy?
Yeah, he plays tight end.
Damn it. I knew you were going to say that.
I mean, so you look at the Chiefs, like they're in the same boat as they were last year. Like they're going to play a lot of guys at wide receiver. And this is a team that doesn't run a lot of 11 personnel because their tight end is the wide receiver. He doesn't play in line. So you look at the Chiefs were 3rd in dropback rate last year, but they were 23rd in 11 personnel rate because Travis Kelce is their de facto wide receiver. Marquez Valdes-Scantling is going to play way more snaps than anyone wants him to. I know that like people want Rashee Rice to be a thing and Sky Moore to be a thing and he who does not be named a thing. But like, they're going like Marquez Valdes-Scantling is going to be out there playing snaps. Look at it in the preseason again. Who's the wide receiver that's played the most snaps with Patrick Mahomes on the field? It's MVS by a gap again. And so like, even I want to say like Sky Moore's ADP is fine, right? Like I have no problem with like taking Sky Moore where he goes, but like, what if Sky Moore doesn't play in 2 wide receiver sets and he only plays in 3 wide receiver sets? Like what kind of value are we squeezing out there? And do we just have to try to get lucky on the weeks we get a touchdown from him? Like, because this is a team that's just not going to run a lot of 11 personnel. So they're going to rotate guys in. I see Rashee Rice a lot like Sky Moore last year, where Sky Moore was the inevitable Juju replacement. Rashee Rice is the inevitable MVS replacement. Maybe in season, there's like something over the course of time that adjusts that. And he's like a back half of the season kind of lid lifter for teams. Like, Scott's written about like rookies and how they perform in the back half of the year. Maybe that's what you're looking for out of Rashee Rice, but he's probably going to be a guy that's on a lot of waiver wires, like come week 5, week 6 of seasons, I believe. And then you still have like when Tony comes back, he's the other wild card because what the Chiefs do consistently is when the Chiefs get in the red zone, they run more jet motion than any team in the NFL. They use motion and jet motion inside the red zone more than anyone in the NFL. And that's Tony's role. Like, right? Like that's his, like when Hardman got hurt and they acquired Tony. Tony was that dude. All the jet motion stuff was his in the inside the red zone. So he's still going to be like that dude as like a thorn. Like even if he never becomes like a full like route tree receiver, the Chiefs are going to use him in that role because he's good at that. You can hand the ball off to him. You can use him in that capacity where like he runs like the half jet motion and runs back. We saw them in the Super Bowl get 2 touchdowns off of that play with Tony and Sky Moore. It's like it's going to be a sum of parts unit again. And I know nobody wants to hear that, but I absolutely am betting on it to be a sum of parts unit, unless Travis Kelce gets hurt, which he is on a God's tier run of never getting hurt, which is absolutely kind of like one of the things that's crazy about Kelce's career.
Yeah, we're not
both Kelce's. They don't miss games,
dude. It's something in the water, something in their genetics. Their parents gave them. You mentioned MVS is going to play more than anybody wants. It's true. He's going to be their guy in 1 and 2 wide receiver sets. I've watched all the Chiefs preseason snaps. I've noticed Sky's played a couple of times in 12 personnel, especially when they have like a stacked formation or reduced splits. So Sky's gotten a few snaps in 12, but yeah, I mean, it's mainly been MVS. I think that'll change though. Like I think ideally they wanted Juju to kind of be the full-time player and like 90 or maybe not even 90, but like 85-90% route share snap player last year, but he couldn't because his knee couldn't hold up. If there's one guy on the team that can do that, it's probably Sky. But I'm with you. It'll probably be some sort of gross rotation once again. And when Scott and I were first talking through projections in like May after the draft, that was like the first thing I said about Kadarius. I'm like, dude, you know what he's going to be, right? He's going to be like their souped up Mecole Hardman. Like, I don't really even care about the downfield stuff too much. He's going to get all like the schemed inside 10 targets. And I still think he could, but obviously 2 knee surgeries this offseason. I was kind of in on Tony when he was going to like the 7th and 8th round in May. And like, I've not drafted him at all. I'm sorry, Scott, but I've been completely out on Tony.
Yeah, he's still must draft for me. I know it doesn't feel good, but
yeah,
that's the take.
I mean, he's cheaper now. I mean, 9th, 10th round. I mean, you can get him as your wide receiver 4 or 5 and just, realize that you're going to be taking zeros probably week 1 and 2. But
in these best balls, I still think he's like palatable where he's going. I think even more so than like where Graham said, like I wasn't drafting him really then, but now like everyone's ejected, like everyone's fully out. And I'm like, this dude still could probably score 5 to 8 touchdowns because that's how they use him. That's how they use that role in the red zone.
Yeah. He certainly could. He'll score 5 to 8 touchdowns or 5 to 6 touchdowns in 5 to 6 games played. It's gonna be great. You'll never know when they're coming.
Yeah, that's the problem. That's why that's the redraft conundrum.
Yeah. So. Yeah. There you go. Rich, this has been great, man. Solid 40 minutes going around the horn, talking through some high-level team-level projections, just talking through the markets this year. This has been great, Rich. I really appreciate it. Anything you want to plug? Obviously, we were talking about your worksheet and season, but anything you got coming up, anything you're excited about?
Yeah, I mean, I put together an actual draft kit this year. It's kind of like the first time we kind of market it as a draft kit, so you can go check that out at the site. If anyone does listen to this, you can use the code SHARP50 and you get 50% off of it for these last 2 weeks in the heavy draft season.
Nice. Very nice. Definitely should check that out. Always check out Rich's work. Rich really does some of the best work in the industry. Follow him on Twitter at Lord Reeves. For Rich, for Scott, this was a 3rd annual 3 Bars projection show. Thank you guys for listening. We will catch you next week.